Hello and welcome to the St. Louis Green Business Challenge Virtual Brown Bag. This is session number 22 for the landmark year 2020. I'm Jean Ponzi, manager of the Green Business Challenge. Glad to have you with us. If you're here in the virtual space or if you're viewing this as an archived edition, this is a really good edition of Virtual Brown Bag to share with your colleagues and your constituents because it's information that we can all use in our lives. And if in your workplace you're dealing with food service in any way, shape, or form, this is also a really good session. I had to editorialize on the title there, Stick a Fork in Food Waste. My colleague Maggie McCoy at the Earthway Center has a little bit more genteel title for it, but hey, what the heck? Stick a fork in it. Want to always acknowledge our sponsors, Graybar Electrical Company. Thanks so much for our generous presenting sponsors supporting the challenge through this, our 11th year of service to our regional economy. Thank you, Graybar. Our sustaining sponsors, Ameren, Missouri, Citizens for Modern Transit, Ride Finders, and Missouri American Water. Thank you for helping all of us sustain sustainability across our regional economy. Supporting the Green Cities Challenge, Madison County, Illinois, supporting the communities in their county, the American Planning Association, combined chapters of Missouri and Illinois, St. Louis Metro, thanks for scholarships to Green Cities, and 1STL, our regional sustainability plan. Thanks for supporting Green Cities Challenge. Supporting anything having to do with waste minimization, like today's topic, St. Louis Jefferson Solid Waste Management District and our Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And here are some dates. Please put these on your Green Business Challenge calendar. Next, Friday, tomorrow, the leaders of the green teams of the Zoo Museum District institutions will meet together in a roundtable. I look forward to meeting with everyone from our colleagues at the Art Museum, my colleagues at the Garden, Missouri Historical Society, the Science Center, and the Zoo. We are all in the challenge for the first time together this year, and we're going to be looking at what we have been doing and what we could be doing together. Tomorrow, yippee, from 1 to 2:30. Green Cities Challenge, calling you all together on the 25th of September in the morning to have our annual report out. What can we learn from one another? What have we been doing? What problems have we been solving? How can we continue to keep sustainability moving forward in our communities? And then year-end materials are due to the challenge team on October. Oh, you know what? It's actually the 16th. It's Friday the 16th. I have to change that. You just got 3 bonus days. And then we will be having a virtual celebration versus an in-person celebration. It will be on Thursday, December 17th. Thursday has become our virtual brown bag convening day. Details for that are coming soon. So that's what's coming up. And then virtual brown bag, here's today, next week, the zoo. Climate Solutions 2.0, they have a Climate Solutions Day happening virtually on the last Sunday of September, and their climate communications initiative continues to engage staff and the public, and to whatever extent we can work with volunteers, our volunteers. We're going to have a session of Virtual Brown Bag about how to prepare your challenge year-end stuff on the 24th. So come with some thoughts. We'll be discussing that, and we'll also just run down the basics of how to submit at the end of the year. Very simple. On October 1st, very special event, a virtual tour of the Advertisers Printing Company, certified green printer with John Heaney of the Advertisers staff. That will be a 45-minute session, a little bit longer than Virtual Brown Bag usually is. So please plan to do that. I've seen the video tour. It's great. John will have some project snapshots to share with you and talk about how sustainability is keeping their printing enterprise alive in the digital age. Maggie McCoy, my esteemed colleague on the staff of the Earthway Center, she's our sustainability education and volunteer coordinator. So with that, Maggie, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation about reducing food waste. Thank you so much for being with us. Uh-oh, Maggie, you are muted. What's happening here? Can't hear you. Did hear you a minute ago. Don't hear you now. Uh-oh. Maggie? Not hearing you in this presentation, and I'm not sure why. Okay, then it's me. Go ahead.
We're still able to understand the words that are coming. So this is a really big topic about reducing food waste, and it's probably one of my favorites. So I cut as much as I could while trying to keep the good stuff in. So I'll try and move through that though. Again, I am the Education and Volunteer Coordinator for the Earth Waste Center, which is the sustainability division of the garden. And so I get to teach on this topic a lot, which is why it ends up being one of my favorites. So one of the reasons why we like to focus on food waste is because we do create a lot of waste in this country. About 15% of what ends up in our landfills is actually food waste. So we throw away a lot of food each year. About 1/3 of the food that we produce in the United States for human consumption is never eaten. It just gets thrown away. So I got to see someone from the EPA talk about that yesterday. And she was like, it's basically like if you carry out 3 bags of groceries from the grocery store and you just leave one on the ground and drive away. It's a lot of food. About 40% of our food in the US, about a third, we just kind of get rid of. And it's a really big problem for a number of reasons. One of them is this issue of sustainability. So if you're in the challenge, you're familiar with our triple bottom line, our people, planet, and prosperity, all coming together to create a sustainability. And figuring out a solution for food waste is one of the easiest ways to sort of help achieve our triple bottom line. So in terms of our people, in 2012, about 14.5% of households in the US were food insecure. And since each year we send about 1.3 billion with a B pounds of food to the landfill, there's lots of ways that we can move that food from being thrown into the landfill into helping make more of our households food secure. In terms of our planet, food waste uses up and squanders so many resources through the supply chain, thinking about the use of water, land, fuel, electricity. So if we're not eating all that food and we're just throwing away, it's a waste of all of those resources and people power that we put into making that food. The other issue is prosperity. So if we think about how much that food actually costs that we landfill every year, it's about 161.6 billion, again with the B, each year. So an average family of 4 throws away about anywhere between like $1,400 and $1,600 of food a year. It breaks down to about $120 a month. So all through the chain, and our people, our planet, and our prosperity, food waste is a big issue on all 3 fronts, and being able to solve our food waste issue can really help us become more sustainable. The other thing is it has to do with our issue of climate change. So if you're not familiar with Project Drawdown, it's a project that looks at all these solutions to climate change that already exist and basically ranks them on their effectiveness in terms of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide equivalent in the atmosphere. And number 3 on the list is reducing food waste. So it's ahead of solar farms, it's ahead of our tropical forests. It's a big one, right? So if we reduce our food waste by 50% over the next 30 years, not 100%, not 75%, just cut it in half, we could save about the equivalent of 70 gigatons of carbon dioxide. Now, gigatons is kind of this big term. It's kind of hard to think of. So you want to think about an Olympic-sized pool, okay? So Michael Phelps in the Olympics, he's swimming through this pool. Here's another shot of one, right? 400,000 Olympic-sized pool of water is 1 gigaton of water. So if we're talking about saving 70 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent over the next 30 years just by cutting our food waste in half, I mean, that's incredible. That should be an easy choice for us to make, and one that we can adapt into our lives in order to help us sort of improve our impact on the environment and help to mitigate the effects of climate change. So how do we do this? We know it's important. It helps in a lot of different ways, but what are the actual aspects of doing this? And these 2 posters are really great. I think Angela Moore was actually the one who showed these to me when I took a tour at Soldiers Memorial. But these are actually posters from around 100 years ago, also actually in the middle of a global pandemic. But during World War I, these posters were put out to help tell people how to conserve their food. So things like buying it with thought, cooking it with care, maybe using a little bit less meat, buying local foods, serving just enough, and then using up everything that's left. And these are basically the same principles that we can use today to help reduce food waste. We kind of knew what they were 100 years ago. It's just making sure that we can sort of bring those up to how we work in our modern life. So one of the tools that I always like to show people is this food recovery hierarchy from the EPA. And it breaks it down into sort of these categories of what's the most preferred to the least preferred. So those top 3 categories, source reduction, feeding hungry people, and feeding animals, are our most preferred. And that's because it actually reduces the amount of waste that we're even trying to find some place to go with it. Somebody's eating it, or we're just not producing it because we don't need it. Those bottom 3 uses, industrial use, composting, and landfill, are waste management strategies. So we want to try and do most of our work in the top half, where we're actually reducing how much we're throwing away, and then just using bottom half solutions when we've really done everything we can to reduce the waste in the first place. Now, since today we're going to focus on what's happening in your own home, I have another graphic that's similar, but will maybe connect us a little bit more to what's going on in our homes. So this is actually from the Waste-Free Kitchen Handbook. So if after this you want sort of like a go-to guide or book for how to do some of this in your own home kitchen, this is a great one. I read through it and found a lot of strategies. But if we're going from our most preferred to least preferred, you want to shop with a list and with restraint, which is very difficult because they put all those cookies and pies and goodies up front, and they just look so good when you walk in. But knowing how to shop with a list and restraint, storing your food well and cooking what you plan to cook, practicing our emergency measures or freezing food, feeding our animals if the food is appropriate and they're able to eat it, using our compost piles or even in-sink disposal if you have it, and then finally the very, very last resort is putting it in the garbage. So the way we're going to move through this today is to go from that top most preferred to the garbage, which is sort of that bottom preferred thing. So we'll move through that list in that way. If you do have any questions, drop them in the chat and we'll leave enough time at the end to answer those. So one of the first things that I always recommend doing is a waste audit of the food in your home. And this is just a way to kind of figure out what you're actually throwing away. Many times we're often really unaware of what's going into our waste. And so this can just be a tool to help bring that awareness. And when you figure out what you're actually throwing away, it can help you pick the best strategy to try and reduce it. So if you're just starting out and you haven't tried to reduce your food waste at all in your home, I would consider only measuring food waste that could actually be eaten. So not things like eggshells or coffee grounds or like the tops of carrots or things like that. If you already have done a lot of food reduction measures, go ahead and add those into your food waste audit if you're ready to sort of tackle some of those more specialty items that are normally considered waste. And then you kind of just want to keep a little notebook, if it's easier to keep it on your phone or just a pad of paper, but you want to track these things every time you throw something, every time you throw food away. You want to write down what the item was that you threw out, about how much there is, so that can be like weight or number, or it's like one container of whatever works best for you. Writing down its approximate value. And the reason you want to write this down is just because if you know the dollars that you're throwing away, it might have more of an impact on how you think about how you use that food next time. And then you also want to write down your reason for throwing it away. And the biggest thing here is to be specific. So instead of saying it was too old, you might want to say, I didn't cook as much as I thought. You might be in a pattern, which I have certainly done before, where you want to be a little bit healthier, maybe a little bit virtuous in terms of your eating habits, and you go to the store and you buy a whole bunch of fruit. And I've certainly done this before, but I don't really end up eating all that fruit, and sometimes it ends up going to waste. So it's just being very specific about why you threw the food away, and then you can use those reasons to inform action you take next. So the waste audit is a great place to start in terms of what you're throwing away. The next step is, again, when we talked about making that list and shopping with restraint, this is that part of it, is how we buy food. So how I do this and what's recommended is making a meal plan for the week or whatever time frame you have in between your shopping trips. And you want to make it realistic, okay? I know a lot of people have been cooking more since we've been home, and people always want to cook at home, but make sure you're honest about how much you're going to eat out. And it's fine to eat out, just like make sure you put that into your plan so you don't have 7 meals worth of dinner food sitting at home and you only really cook 4. If you know you're going to eat out, make that part of the plan. And so you want to make your list and then check your fridge or pantry as you're making that list. So for example, like I use the the reminders app on my iPhone, and I have it shared with my husband so that we can both add to the list. And then if we go to the store, we can both check stuff off. It's the easiest thing for us. But we make our list and then we shop our fridge and our pantry and just cross off everything we have. The other thing that we do sometimes is we'll go through our fridge and we'll say, like, well, what do we have that really needs to be used up, and make our meal list based on that. So you kind of want to see what you have and what needs to be used up, and plan that way. And then stick to your shopping list, which we've kind of already talked about, but stores are designed to get you to buy things. Try and resist as many of those extras as you can, especially if they're things that are perishable. So even if strawberries, you could buy 3 containers for a certain price, you know, are you really going to eat that many strawberries? So just being realistic about that. And then consider creating a food garden if you find there's items that you don't necessarily use all of, but you buy a lot. So like some things I found is like basil. Like, why buy basil? Just get a plant, they're super cheap, and then you can have basil, more basil than you could possibly want. Different herbs I find are really good for this. And then I always like having spinach in my garden because I never want like a whole bag of it. I just want a little bit. So sort of think about those things as you go through your waste audit. Once you've shopped with restraint and you've only bought what was on your list, you need to make sure that you're storing the food properly so that it's preserved as long as possible. So this is one picture of it from the USDA that sort of shows how to use different things. To keep in mind that the bottom part of your fridge is going to be the coldest part, and the warmest part of your fridge is going to be at the top. So you want to store things like leftovers at the top of your fridge because you're going to eat them more quickly than some other things that you want to keep colder. The door doesn't stay very cold because you're opening it, it's on the outside. So you don't want to store anything that's perishable there. That's just for your things like condiments and things that don't need to stay quite as cold, or have like huge food safety issues. You might want to think about canning or preserving some of those foods or fermenting them if you're into that process. I haven't gotten quite that far along yet. I'm more of a freezer than a canner or fermenter, but it's just to keep in mind as an option. I do have this graphic too. I know some of the print's small, but I'll point out some of the important things, but this is also from that waste-free kitchen handbook. And the other thing that you want to be aware of is your drawers. A lot of people don't really know how to use the drawers in their fridge. So most people are going to have a high humidity and a low humidity drawer, or drawers that you can change the settings on. So for example, that high humidity drawer is where you want to put most of those veggies, especially those that are going to wilt. By keeping humidity in that drawer, you're going to be able to keep the moisture in those foods so that they don't wilt quite as often. So think carrots, your greens, celery is another one that can go in there. And then your fruits you want to keep in your low humidity drawer, because those are things that are going to tend more often to like mold or go bad if they're in too humid an environment. So you really want to check that out and make sure that you're putting them in the right way, and that air can move pretty easily through your refrigerator to make sure everything's cool. So these are pictures of my drawers at home. Your drawers might look a little bit different. Like I have a convertible drawer on the bottom for vegetables or meats. So I set it at a high humidity rate so that my veggies stay good, and my fruits are all in a low humidity vegetable or low humidity fruit drawer. so that they stay better for longer. So storing your food properly is super important to it lasting as long as possible. If you're not sure how to store something, you can check out the Food Keeper app. It can go on your phone, or there's a website for it that you can check out, and you can basically pick any type of food. This is from USDA, and it'll just tell you what's the best way to store that food if you're unsure. So it's a nice one to look at. The other thing to know is your food labels. I'm going to say that most labels on your food, unless it's infant formula, are not safety dates. They're recommendations for when things are going to be best by or have the best quality, but it's not like your milk. Like this milk, for example, it's not like on April 10th, it all of a sudden turned into chunky curdles and was completely undrinkable. It's probably going to be fine for many days past that date. That's just a recommendation. So this language on this slide, I did pull directly from the USDA since it is food safety, and we want to make sure we're specific about the language we're using. Most products are trying to move to this best if used by or before date to make it clear that it's not like it becomes poisonous at midnight on the date that's on there, but that it's just best if or has the highest quality by that date. It's not a safety date. Sell by date is just for inventory management at stores, not a safety date. Use by, again, it's about peak quality, not a safety date unless it's on infant formula. Freeze by, again, it's just a recommendation for when you should put things in the freezer to maintain the highest quality. So knowing your food labels is super important. If you've done all those things, you've shopped with restraint, you've stored your food well, but maybe something came up, or you just need a way to use up food that maybe is going to go bad soon. SaveTheFood.com has a lot of really good strategies for how to use up food when they're near the end of their life, or information about how to freeze food if you're uncertain about the best method for freezing food. So it's got all these lists on the side. You can look through it and pick which works for you, but this is a great resource if you've got things that are getting close to the end of their life and you need to find a way to use them. So if you do all those steps and you still have some food left over that's gone a little bit bad, you can compost your food, which is sort of at the bottom of our chain, but is a really great option. In 2015, about 38% of food waste was composted in the US, 57% in the European Union. If we all sort of raised our levels of composting all around the world, we could save about 2 to 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2050. And again, that comes from that Project Drawdown. Composting is also great because it helps to recirculate nutrients. So you really want to compost your food waste, if at all possible, if you've done every single reduction step. And there are a ton of ways to compost food, and I guarantee you there's one method of composting that will match up with you. Everybody has different needs in terms of the output of their food waste, their space, kind of what their, how much effort they want to put in, but there's so many composting methods out there that there's one perfect method for everybody. And so you can do an outdoor method if you have a lot of stuff like your 3-bin methods, or a hot heap. Tumblers are really great if you have maybe a little bit smaller amount and you want to make it go really quickly. There's also indoor composting methods like vermicomposting and bokashi. I'm a big indoor composter with my worms and my vermicomposter, but there's a method for everybody if you want to get into composting. So it's a great option if you have anything left over. And then there are a ton of resources out there about reducing food waste. There's so many good resources on the internet. So if you're looking to use something up, you want to get into canning or preserving, or you need recipes for using up food, this is where the internet is your friend. Lots of good places to go for information, and lots of good places to go if you're interested in more of the background on food waste throughout the United States and ways that people are reducing it. So Jean, that's everything I got, and I am ready for questions.
Do you have a slide, Maggie, with your contact information?
Yes, that's actually the first slide. Do you want me to pull that up now?
Yeah, put it up again. Yes, yes.
Okay.
So I don't see any questions in the chat, but I want to ask you again about labeling. Who monitors this labeling? Is there a federal agency? Why is there such inconsistency and, to me, misleading information in food labeling? Best by, sell by, freeze by, blah blah blah.
So there's not necessarily like an organization that mandates that. A lot of times that's up to manufacturers. The USDA is trying to move in the direction of having it more standardized with that best by or best if used by label. But except in the case of like infant formula, there's no laws necessarily governing those labels. That's up to the manufacturer and their discretion. So, but I think there is some interest in moving towards having that be something that's more standardized.
Yes, we will share this. We will share this presentation for the resources, and we will be able to review it at a later time, and also be able to send you a link to share with your colleagues. Excuse me. So Maggie, you've dug into this subject, I know, a lot over this year and before, and you've been teaching about composting for a long time. You really know this stuff inside and out. What is something that really has struck you that has been a new hunk of learning or a new hunk of practice for you since you've dealt with this subject matter?
I think a lot of it has been how I store things, and then how much more aware I am of using up the foods that we have. So like I was always sort of a meal planner before. I'm a planner. I like things written down. I like to kind of know what's coming. But I think before I wasn't as aware of all the different ways that I could store my foods and kind of what was best to keep it going, and sort of like the best way to use my fridge. And I think the other thing that I'm a lot more aware of now, especially since about March of this year, is making sure that I absolutely squeeze everything out of my fridge and my pantry before I end up having to go back to the store again. So I've gotten a lot more creative and sort of found a lot of different ways to sort of use up foods that I already have. And that's sort of been a big part of learning. I think the other thing is that I knew that food waste was a big issue, but I think when I actually dug into like how big an impact it has on climate, I just don't think I was aware of how large an impact it has on climate. And just, you know, I mean, and we wouldn't even have to do it by 100%. It's like, oh, half of my food waste, I can do that. That's not asking, I think, above and beyond. And so just knowing the scale of the impact that you can have, I think is something that's really struck me.
Are you seeing innovations in avenues for distributing food? I know one of the top things in the food hierarchy pyramid for EPA is getting food to feed hungry people and to feed animals. How about the distribution networks for that? How is that an area that, and is that something that you think business can contribute to?
Well, I think certainly in terms of distribution, that's something that businesses can contribute to. I think the other thing, and this is something that you would have to check with like local laws or the EPA about, but there's lots of programs for people to redistribute food that they don't use to people who do need it. And there are some laws that like if you really think the food is safe and that it's good to be distributed, that you can donate that food. And I think that's a really big way that people can contribute, but also just making sure that we're looking at where people live and where food actually needs to get to. Because especially in St. Louis, I know we're, there's a lot of places where people just do not have access to food in the ways that they need to. And so helping to sort of redistribute food in that way is a big thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Have a note here from Deb Stoller. She has been composting with BLH Farm. That is a small enterprise. It is an organic farm. They will give you a bin. They will come back and collect the compost. That is an enterprise it's kind of a boutique, a personalized service within a limited geographic range. Yes, and we do our very best to keep track of those kinds of resources at the Earthway Center. One last quick question for you, Maggie. Of all your habits, what was the smallest change you made to your habits that you believe has made the biggest impact?
That is the smallest change. I think one of the things that we've done, and this is going to sound really kind of, I don't know, obvious or silly, We've really tried to become more intentional in our fridge about putting the oldest things up front instead of letting them migrate to the back. So when we put like leftovers in the evening from dinner, I'll sort of switch everything that's old to the front. That way, when we're grabbing lunches the next day, the very first thing up front is the thing that's the oldest. So just trying to make sure that we're really eating down that oldest food first. And I mean, when I do that, there's so many fewer things that we all have it in the back of the fridge, that area that stuff migrates to and it never comes back from, or at least when it comes back from, yeah, it's growing something on it. And so I think that's been the biggest change, is just making that habit of when putting leftovers into the fridge, moving the old stuff to the front and putting the newer stuff in back. That way it's just very obvious what needs to go first.
I also got in the habit at the beginning of COVID sequester of writing the expiration dates of things in big numbers so that I can read them without a magnifying glass on the cans and on the containers. And then also rotating the newer thing to the back of the pantry and the older thing to the front of the pantry. That was really helpful to me about, you know, certain things that might tend to be in there longer, or things that were more foods that I were getting because they keep longer, making sure that I don't overuse them. One last quick question, and then we're going to let everyone go. Angela Moore began to compost, but the raccoons and other night critters totally destroyed the bin and made a mess each night. How can she critter-proof her compost bin? Maggie McCoy.
Oh boy. That's a big question, Angela. It kind of depends on what bin you have. I will say that's the reason I'm an indoor composter. So that's why I keep my worms inside. But lots of people have success with outdoor bins. A lot of it is just making sure that if you have food waste, you layer a lot of like garden waste, like grass clippings or leaves on top of it. That way it's fully buried so that smell's not getting out. Some people end up using something like a tumbler because it is a closed system. That way it's a little bit harder for things to get in. But man, squirrels and raccoons, they are the wiliest critters out there. So yeah, it's just learning kind of how to maintain. I live in the city as well. So raccoons and possums are no stranger to us. So I tend to do the indoor method just to avoid having to deal with that.
And the question about what happens to the food waste that goes down the garbage disposal, it goes into the drain, into the wastewater system, and has to be filtered out and processed with all of the other wastewater. And there are systems to handle that, but then there is no opportunity for recovery of the nutrients in the food waste that goes down the garbage disposal, unless someone is taking biosolids from the sewage system and using that to be composted, which is pretty far down the chain. Maggie McCoy of the Earthway Center at Missouri Botanical Garden, thank you so much for sharing some of your food waste expertise and encouragement with us today in Challenge Virtual Brown Bag.
Thanks, Jean, for having me. This was fun.
Thanks everybody for coming. We are working on an efficient system of archiving and sharing these presentations, and we will continue Virtual Brown Bag into the fall. Thursdays, 12 to 12:30. There are no stinky leftovers in Virtual Brown Bag because we are managing our food waste in the Green Business Challenge. I'm Jean Ponzi. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the green things that you do in the St. Louis Green Business Challenge.